أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Alright, so the check-in questions are: how are you? How was your week? Which of your assumptions have you become aware or more mindful of over the past few days or weeks? So there's nothing wrong with this, I just have an extra space here that is bothering me. So, not bothering me, but I figured I'd address it. So how did this happen? How did this awareness come to be, or more mindfulness come to be? Was it an experience, an event, something happened? How did this impact your feelings and emotions, and confusion that you might have had in your life, some stress you might have had, plans overall in terms of how you move forward, and overall happiness and contentment or contentment? So I did some more things at the bottom. I said, how can our experiences and memories shape our assumptions? And how can our assumptions limit us? So keep those questions in mind along with the other questions that we've had. And then we will go ahead and move on to the next part. So this is just a review, and we are really looking at how things work, how things stop us, how to plan, how not to plan, what are some things that become obstacles in our growth and development, in our transformation, and things like that. So once we understand that, we will be able to have realistic mile markers or steps that we can take that are going to be effective in our transformation journey, in our growth and development journey, and so on. And this is again just reminders, and some of the things you're going to find over and over and over again are going to be fear of failure. And again, that fear might be perceived fear. It may not be actual real fear in the sense that or I should say, it may not be, they may not be things that are well-founded, if you want to say it like that. And I don't mean to say well-founded as in like the person is crazy and that they're having crazy thoughts or whatever. But what I'm saying is, they may not have, if you really explore them, some of those things that they're afraid of may not necessarily need to be there, and we can address them and so on. So that's what I mean by that. And there might be fear of injury, or fear of success means like, how is my life going to change if I become famous, or if I succeed, or if whatever happens, how is that going to look very different than what I'm doing right now? And that fear of that kind of change impacts the person. Like, maybe I'm going to lose friends, or maybe my life is going to have to change a certain way, and family dynamics are going to have to change, and so on and so on. So that can also hinder some people. And other things are unrealistic expectations, and so this is related to what we are asking questions about right now. And then another thing is lack of purpose and so on, and meaningless life, for example, and things like that. So the meaningless life, or the lack of ultimate purpose, can be connected to existential crises that people might go through, like, what am I doing, why am I in this world, and stuff, like, what is my purpose and stuff. And sometimes that can actually manifest itself in the form, it can get really, really deep, and people can get into clinical depression or major depressive disorders, and they can get really, really deep into that, and even contemplate suicide and things like that. So just some things to keep in mind over here. Okay, so with that in mind, let us go to brain games, and as part of the brain games, we are going to do some explorations. So
I'm Jonathan Proper, CEO of Jobs.com, and I'm here to give you the naked truth about laundry.
Why is the sky?
So the question is, why is the sky blue? Why is the ocean blue? We had the question, why is the sky blue, last time. The question today is, why is the ocean blue. So what are your possibilities?
Can I refer back to the video from last time?
Sure.
She mentioned something about the
Rayleigh scattering?
Sorry?
Go ahead, sorry.
I think she mentioned something about the oxygen and hydrogen molecules.
Okay.
I can't remember the specifics of what she had mentioned. Something to do with the molecules themselves.
Okay, so you're saying that that could also be connected to why is the ocean blue?
Right.
Okay. Possibilities, yes. So we're just exploring possibilities. Even if you know the right answer, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You just mention all the different possibilities that a person could think of.
Another possibility could be like some sort of living plant life that makes it blue.
Okay, another person might say, like plant life, or the same person might say that. Okay, so another possibility could be plant life that's there.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's reflecting the sky.
Okay, or maybe reflecting the sky. So there's 3 possibilities so far. Other possibilities? And again, these possibilities don't need to be correct things. They're just possibilities. As a person who's never seen the ocean, or maybe they've seen the ocean and trying to figure out what it is for the first time, then the idea is, okay, well, how do we figure out how to explore the why behind something, right? And so we come up with different possibilities of why something could be like that, and then we, like, let's say that we're gonna do an educated guess. These are a bunch of educated guesses. These are possibilities, and then you try to explore one of them or a few of them, and you can go like have a checklist, or like, okay, the possibility number 1, if I want to explore this, how do I explore it, right? So I need to come up with a process or some way of actually exploring it, and then finding the answer, and then going from there, right? So you do that one by one for everything, and then go from there. Now, the how to test out the possibility requires a procedure, and the procedure requires you to understand the implications of your theory, whatever possibility it might be. And even in that case, you'd have to explore a little bit deeper about what your possibility means. Like, what does it mean that it's the oxygen and hydrogen molecules and stuff that are playing a role here, and how do you measure the different possibilities of how they could be playing a role? So not just that this is a possibility, like hydrogen and oxygen as a possibility, but also how could they be impacting? So there could be multiple different possibilities attached to this one possibility, right? You can consider them as sub possibilities. And so for each one of them, you're going to have to come up with a process to measure. And then each of those subcategories or sub possibilities might have further sub possibilities, right? Maybe it's like a possibility of they're together, for example, and there's something associated with the light. Okay, in that case, how does that work, right? And how do you measure whatever that sub possibility might be? Okay, so other possibilities.
There could be a substance dissolved in the water.
Okay, there could be substances dissolved in water. Okay, and that might be different than dissolved oxygen, for example.
Or our eyes, something with our eyes, like the reception.
Okay, so something about how we perceive, our eyes are able to pick up certain wavelengths or whatever, like the other video was talking about. Okay. Remember, at the end, whatever answer that we get after exploring the different possibilities, at the end of the day, your projection is going to be that, okay, based on our research, we explored something very specific, like this very specific sub possibility or sub possibility, and that is something that we've figured, we've looked at, and it seems to be there seems to be a correlation or something like that. Maybe not a causation yet, but just a correlation, a connection between the two things. And then you're going to be like, okay, that's that. But then, as you explore different possibilities, you might get more information, and you might be able to get a more of a complete picture, or not. And so, what like the way that knowledge would work in this case is very incrementally, right? One little tiny piece at a time. And so that's why, if you notice at the end of papers, they're going to say, well, we cannot generalize this, or this population sample, or the sample was really small, or maybe like the stuff that we were looking at may not be applicable in most cases and stuff. It may only be applicable in a very specific case and stuff. But unfortunately, what happens is that when this information, these journal articles, for example, are taken out of these studies, or like the data that's in these articles or these studies and stuff is taken out, or the conclusions that are taken out, they actually are presented in a very broad manner, and so they seem to generalize beyond what they should be generalizing. And so it's like, whereas the data is sort of confined to whatever it was looking at, so and you can sort of maneuver within the extent of the data and like interpolate, right? When it comes into different I guess in different platforms outside of this scope, right? Like general media or whatever, then in that case it might actually be generalized. And so this is extrapolation, which is beyond the scope of the data points and stuff. So keep that in mind. In the meantime, other possibilities. Let's come up with maybe like one or two, and then we'll move on. Anything on this? So obviously something like this would take a long time to come up with all the possibilities. We came up with some of them. We don't have to like go beyond this. We can just pause here and continue like watching why the ocean is blue.
Why is the sky blue? Is like the classic curious kid question. People wonder about it all the time. But for all those people asking why the sky is blue, for some reason you don't get too many questions about why is blue. Maybe that's because the ocean sits under the sky, so you might just assume that the oceans look blue because they reflect the sky. But if science has taught us anything, it's that just because something seems obvious, that doesn't mean it's true. Like in this case, because the real reason the ocean is blue has more to do with the fact that water is just inherently blue. The sky is blue because of Rayleigh scattering, where bluer light bounces off of air molecules better than redder light. And some of that blue does reflect off the ocean surface, but that's not the main reason the ocean is blue. The ocean is blue mainly from absorbing light, not from reflecting it. Different types of light can make water molecules vibrate in different ways. When light, like from the sun, hits water, light on the redder side of the spectrum has just enough energy to get those molecules wiggling. So water absorbs red, yellow, and green light better than blue. Most water molecules can't do much with blue light though, so it basically just goes right on by. A small amount of water, like in a cup, might look like it lets every color through equally well, since it's transparent. But that cup of water actually lets slightly more blue through than red. And in the ocean, by the time you get to about 100 meters deep, almost all of the red light has been absorbed. So the water is a deep blue color. Water still absorbs some blue light though, which is why the oceans are completely dark below about 1 kilometer deep. Some blue light also gets reflected back towards the surface instead of being absorbed on its way down, giving the Earth its beautiful blue oceans. There are some places with water that's a different color. It might be blue-green, for example, because of an algae that reflects green light. And near mouths of big rivers, the ocean can look brown because of the dirt and silt that's in the river. No matter what's in it, deep water looks pretty blue, because that's the only color of sunlight left after the other colors were absorbed. Some animals have even evolved to take advantage of this by being red instead of blue. Blue animals in deep water will reflect that blue light, so they'll be easier for predators predators to find or for prey to avoid. But with little to no red light to reflect off of red animals, animals with red skin or scales or whatever just look black in deep water, which makes them harder to find. So no matter what the sky looks like today, just remember that deep water is always blue. Thanks to Patreon patrons Arafa Piedefero and someone who just put their name as a pair of brackets for asking this question, and thanks to all of our patrons who keep these answers coming. If you'd like to submit a question to be answered, go to patreon.com/scishow, and don't forget to go to youtube.com/scishow and subscribe.
All right, so that was why the water is blue, or the ocean is blue. Now, some of the things that we discussed, or some of the possibilities that were brought up, some of them put together may have impacted the different cases. For example, when the water might be blue-green, or maybe because of algae, for example, or maybe because of certain other things that are in the water and stuff, like silt and dirt and stuff like that, that might make it look something different. So in this case, we would have to investigate all of those different possibilities to be able to get the different components of this this conundrum, if you may, resolved. All right, now let's go to these. So now you can pick. Now this one is continuing on the discussion, the philosophical, the discussion about how we figure out how things work and how they don't work and so on. And this is going into a little bit more about the continuity of, in the past few videos, they were focusing on answering the question of how do we address the issue of God or creation and things like that, or how do we figure out the issues of how do we know something versus like not knowing about it and stuff. How do we verify if this is a reality versus not reality, capital T truth versus lowercase t truth and so on. So this is just the continuity of that series. This one is a TED talk on the impact of experience. So they call it the riddle of experience versus memory, but it does go into a little bit about how experience and memories impact us in our daily lives and so on.
Can we do experience versus memory?
Okay. Okay, so he is a person that has some background in psychology and economics and so on. You can kind of see what it is written about him.
Everybody talks about happiness these days. I had somebody count the number of books with happiness in the title published in the last 5 years, and they gave up after about 40, and there were many more. There is a huge wave of interest in happiness among researchers. There is a lot of happiness coaching. Everybody would like to make people happier. But in spite of all this flood of work, there are several cognitive traps that sort of make it almost impossible to think straight about happiness. And my talk today will be mostly about these cognitive traps. This applies to lay people thinking about their own happiness, and it applies to scholars thinking about happiness, because it turns out we're just as messed up as anybody else is. The first of these traps is a reluctance to admit complexity. It turns out that the word happiness is just not a useful word anymore because we apply it to too many different things. I think there is one particular meaning to which we might restrict it, but by and large, this is something that we'll have to give up, and we'll have to adopt a more complicated view of what well-being is. The second trap is a confusion between experience and memory. Basically, it's between being happy in your life and being happy about your life, or happy with your life. And those are two very different concepts, and they're both lumped in the notion of happiness. And the third is, it's the focusing illusion. And it's the unfortunate fact that we can't think about any circumstance that affects well-being without distorting its importance. I mean, this is a real cognitive trap. There's just no way of getting it right. Now, I'd like to start with an example of somebody with a question and answer session after one of my lectures, reported a story, and that was the story. He said he had been listening to a symphony, and it was absolutely glorious music. And at the very end of the recording, there was a dreadful screeching sound. And then he added, really quite emotionally, it ruined the whole experience. But it hadn't. What it had ruined was the memory of the experience. He had had the experience. He had had 20 minutes of glorious music. They counted for nothing because he was left with a memory. The memory was ruined, and the memory was all that he had gotten to keep. What this is telling us really is that we might be thinking of ourselves and of other people in terms of two selves. There is an experiencing self who lives in the present and knows the present. It's capable of reliving the past, but basically it has only the present. It's the experiencing self that the doctor approaches, you know, when the doctor asks, does it hurt now when I touch you here? And then there is a remembering self. And the remembering self is the one that keeps score and maintains the story of our life. And it's the one that the doctor approaches in asking the question, how have you been feeling lately? Or how was your trip to Albania? Or something like that. Those are two very different entities.
So remember how in our questions in the very beginning, we say, how are you? And then like, how was your week? So, you know, in this case, you get to talk about what's happening right now versus what happened in the past. And so it's kind of going into a little bit of, you know, your experiencing self and your remembering self. Well, you know, this is just like, you know, how he's presenting it. Yeah, I'm not talking about like, you know, what others might say or whatever. This is just sort of like what he's trying to frame it as, the remembering self versus the experiencing self.
The experiencing self and the remembering self, and getting confused between them is part of the mess about the notion of happiness. Now, the remembering self is a storyteller, and that really starts with a basic response of our memory. It starts immediately. We don't only tell stories when we set out to tell stories. Our memory tells us stories. That is, what we get to keep from our experiences is a story. And let me begin with one example. This is an old study. Those are actual patients undergoing a painful procedure. I won't go into detail. It's no longer painful these days, but it was painful when this study was run in the 1990s. They're asked to report on their pain every 60 seconds. And here are two patients. Those are their recordings. And you're asked, who of them suffered more? And it's a very easy question. I mean, clearly patient B suffered more. His colonoscopy was longer, and every minute of pain that patient A had, patient B had, and more. But now there is another question. How much did these patients think they suffered? And here is a surprise. And the surprise is that patient A had a much worse memory of the colonoscopy than patient B. The stories of the colonoscopies were different, and because a very critical part of the story is how it ends. And neither of these stories is very inspiring or great, but one of them is distinctly worse than the other. And the one that is worse is the one where pain was at its peak at the very end. It's a bad story. How do we know that? Because we asked these people after their colonoscopy, and much later too, how bad was the whole thing in total? And it was much worse for A than for B in memory. Now, this is a direct conflict between the experiencing self and the remembering self. From the point of view of the experiencing self, clearly B had a worse time. Now, what you could do with patient A, and we actually ran clinical experiments, and it has been done and it does work, you could actually extend the colonoscopy of patient A by just keeping the tube in without jiggling it too much. That will cause the patient to suffer, but just a little, and much less than before. And if you do that for a couple of minutes, you have made the experiencing self of patient A worse off, And you've made the remembering self of patient A lot better off, because now you have endowed patient A with a better story about his experience. What defines a story?
So notice at the end of the day, he's saying that the people that were going through the pain, in the chart, you might have seen that the patient B was the one describing a lot of pain and so on, right? But then patient A was the one that actually remembered at the end, they remembered the overall experience to be more negative. Why? Because they ended up in a negative way, right? So there is something that the experiencing itself might not remember when it comes to the remembering stuff. In other words, if I go through an experience and it was a great experience, but one bad thing happened and stuff and it caught my attention, then the remembering self is going to remember that, and the entire experience itself is sort of like erased from the picture, right? So patient A, even though in the charts it looked like that person was not really feeling much pain, whereas patient B was feeling a lot, at the end of it, the person may have felt like, okay, well, you know what, the ending was really good and stuff, so they closed off on a good note, and therefore it was done. Now, there were some studies done also in terms of people that have marital disputes and so on, or any kind of disputes between partners and stuff, right? Within relationships, and they realized that everyone had arguments. So they realized that both happy couples and couples that were not happy, they both had arguments, and that wasn't a determining factor whether they're going to be in a marriage or not and stuff, or whether they're going to be in a relationship or not. What ended up actually determining whether a person is going to be within the same relationship long term was how they ended it. So in one case, for example, they were the husband and wife were having a dispute, and they were just arguing about something and stuff, and then the wife sort of sticks her tongue out and stuff and just kind of has a pose and stuff, and then they both start cracking up and stuff, right? And so that was a couple who ended ended the conversation on a good note, as opposed to others who might be really back and forth. They might have a really toxic back and forth and stuff, and it doesn't end on a good note, and it doesn't follow up on a good note and stuff for the afterwards. So the idea is the memory versus the experience of it may be two different things. And so that if you can have an experience that ends in a good note, or you can try to make sure that the ending of an experience is good, or even if you in the moment before you close the experience, or before the experience ends, or even as it ends, you sort of frame it that, hey, it was a great experience and stuff, right? Then your memory is going to be like that. So your remembering stuff is going to remember it as positive at the end of the day. So the idea over here is to remember that your memory and your experiences may not align together, and so to make sure that you have a good memory of it, you have to do something in the moment itself. And you can also go backwards in time mentally and try to see if you can edit, so to speak, your experience so that it ends on a good note, or you can try to find something good in it so that you can have a good memory of it. So keep this in mind. This is something that that we can take from this.
And that is true of the stories that memory delivers for us, and it's also true of the stories that we make up. What defines a story are changes, significant moments, and endings. Endings are very, very important. And in this case, the ending dominated. Now, the experiencing self lives its life continuously. It has moments of experience, one after the other.
The colonoscopy, there was, I believe the second patient had it where the ending was better because of the fact that they left the tube in for a little bit, and so the pain sort of subsided, and so the ending experience was a lot less painful than the beginning experience. So it actually so it sort of seemed that things were decreasing in terms of pain, so that was a good thing. And so the thing is remembered as a much better experience than it actually was during the entire rest of the colonoscopy. So now he's talking about how the experiencing self, the experiences one after the other and stuff.
And you can ask, what happens to these moments? And the answer is really straightforward. They're lost forever. I mean, most of the moments of our life, when I calculated, the psychological present is said to be about 3 seconds long. That means that, In a life, there are about 600 million of them. In a month, there are about 600,000. Most of them don't leave a trace. Most of them are completely ignored by the remembering self. And yet, somehow you get the sense that they should count, that what happens during these moments of experience is our life. It's the finite resource that we're spending while we're on this earth. And how to spend it would seem to be relevant. But that is not the story that our remembering self keeps for us. So we have the remembering self and the experiencing self, and they're really quite distinct. The biggest difference.
Now, how could this relate to trauma, for example? How could this relate to people having certain, feelings about themselves or about their past, about their accomplishments, about things that they've done, about things that might be defining them, and so on? So how could this impact that, that set of things? So think about that as you're going through this, and think about this in other people's life, but also your life. How could you look back and reflect on some of the ways that this might have impacted you? How could this be something that you can use to reframe past experience or memories of past experiences in a positive way, by going back and trying to identify some of the other positive elements in the memory of something that was remembered as something negative? So the actual experience, if you can actually go back and remember, for example, some of the positive things that were good in, let's say there was a relationship that two people had, and it ended up in I don't know, like in breaking up, like the relationship ending or something like that. So in this case, you could have a distaste in this. You might remember it as a negative thing because of the ending. But if you can go back and find the good moments in it, right? How could that change your perspective? How could that change the way you feel about it, right? So if you, for example, had a friend, and two friends broke apart and stuff, right? It could be seeming as a negative thing, but if you go back and remember, try to find those memories, or find those, recall some instances where you actually had a great time together, then how could you use that to dominate your memory of this, so that you don't have a grudge against that friend, you don't have negative feelings towards that person, and so on, but rather you can say it, alhamdulillah, I had a great time with this person, and it didn't work out, things happen or whatever, we move forward. So you don't look back and think negative, but you look back and you find happiness in the past, and you felt contentment. You're like, alhamdulillah, I got this opportunity to meet this person. Yeah, we had some disagreements, things could have been better and stuff, I picked my lessons out of this and stuff, but looking back and stuff, I do have great memories of this that are predominant in this experience that I've had with this person. And so that way you go back and you're not really like stuck in the past with negative memories and what I call negative memory anchors, but rather you're actually looking at these things in a positive way. And so you change things and stuff. So this is also something associated with the gratefulness journals that people can have, where you can write down what you're grateful for and stuff, right? So it helps you in the moments when you're feeling really negative or you feel like you don't have much. You go back and look at the actual positive set of things that you do have, or the things that you are grateful for, and so on. So your brain starts thinking in a different way, then it becomes more positive. And this is just rewiring your brain, because we have that capacity to do that.
Between them is in the handling of time. From the point of view of the experiencing self, if you have a vacation and the second week is just as good as the first, then the 2-week vacation is twice as good as the 1-week vacation. That's not the way it works at all for the remembering self. For the remembering self, the 2-week vacation is barely better than the 1-week vacation, because there are no new memories added. You have not changed the story. And in this way, time is actually the critical variable that distinguishes our remembering self from our experiencing self. Time has very little impact on the story. Now, the remembering self does more than remember and tell stories. It is actually the one that makes decisions. Because if you have a patient who has had, say, 2 colonoscopies with 2 different surgeons and is deciding which of them to choose, then the one that chooses is the one that has, the memory that is less bad. And that's the surgeon that will be chosen. The experiencing self has no voice in this choice. We actually don't choose between experiences. We choose between memories of experiences. And even when we think about the future, we don't think of our future normally as experiences. We think of our future as anticipated memories. And basically, you can look at this, as a tyranny of the remembering self. And
So, anticipating memories. You're looking forward and thinking about what kind of memories you're going to have from this experience.
you can think the remembering self sort of dragging the experiencing self through experiences that the experiencing self doesn't need. I have that sense that when we go on vacations, this is very frequently the case. That is, that we go on vacations to a very large extent in the service of our remembering self. And this is a bit hard to justify, I think. I mean, how much do we consume our memories? That is one of the explanations that is given for the dominance of the remembering self. And when I think about that, I think about a vacation we had in Antarctica a few years ago, which was clearly the best vacation I've ever had. And I think of it relatively often, relative to how much I think of other vacations. And I probably have consumed my memories of that 3-week trip, I would say, for about 25 minutes in the last 4 years. Now, if I had ever opened the folder with the 600 pictures in it, I would have spent another hour. Now, that is 3 weeks, and that is at most an hour and a half. There seems to be a discrepancy. Now, I may be a bit extreme, in how little appetite I have for consuming memories. But even if you do more of this, there is a genuine question. Why do we put so much weight on memory relative to the weight that we put on experiences?
So this is a question that I want to ask over here in a different way. Have you ever been in a really beautiful landscape, or somewhere where you were hiking and stuff? There was a really nice scene, or somewhere that you went and you just wanted to take the pictures of that situation. So you took out your phone or your camera and stuff and you started taking pictures. Have you ever had an experience like this where you were going somewhere, you were traveling, you were on vacation, whatever it was, but you came across a certain scene and you took out your phone or camera and you wanted to take pictures, or you wanted to record the video of it and stuff and all that? Have you ever had that situation?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and have you ever been to events like weddings or parties or whatever, where that's you pulled out your phone and you want to take pictures and stuff, versus taking a moment and just living that experience and saying, just saying, let me keep my phone in my pocket and let me just focus on the moment itself, the experience of it all, right? So this is the difference between the experience and the memory. So what is your memory, and what is your remembering self pushing you towards? And like the experience that you might have had traveling or hiking or vacation or whatever, it might have been a certain number of days, but you are planning for a short amount of time that you might spend looking over the memories of that experience, as opposed to experiencing the thing itself, right?
So I want you to think about a thought experiment. Imagine that for your next vacation, you know that at the end of the vacation, all your pictures will be destroyed and you'll get an amnesic drug so that you won't remember anything. Now, would you choose the same vacation? And if you would choose a different vacation, there is a conflict between your two selves. And you need to think about how to adjudicate that conflict. And it's actually not at all obvious, because if you think in terms of time, then you get one answer. And if you think in terms of memories, you might get another answer. Why do we pick the vacations we do is a problem that confronts us, with a choice between the two selves. Now, the two selves bring up two notions of happiness. There are really two concepts of happiness that we can apply, one per self. And so you can ask how happy is the experiencing self. And then you would ask how happy are the moments in the experiencing self's life. And there are happiness for moments is a fairly complicated process. What are the emotions that can be measured? And by the way, now we are capable of getting a pretty good idea of the happiness of the experiencing self over time. If you ask for the happiness of the remembering self, it's a completely different thing. This is not about how happily a person lives. It is about how satisfied or pleased the person is when that person thinks about her life.
Now think about that. In a world where everything is about remembering, like, your memories and stuff, taking pictures, recording everything that you're doing, and not living in the moment, not living in the experience itself, and really planning for the future, the anticipated memories or the memories of the experience that you're supposed to be experiencing, but you're just recording for later viewing and stuff, right? How could that impact, or how could that explain some of the things that might be happening today in terms of how a person feels about their life, how they look back and they see, that they haven't done much or whatever, or they feel bad about themselves, or they feel like they haven't accomplished certain things, or whatever else, right? Or they think negative about certain other aspects of their life. How could that be how could that be explainable by the difference between the remembering self and the experience self, and how that is how our lifestyle today is impacting, like, in this aspect?
Very different notions. Anyone who doesn't distinguish those notions is going to mess up the study of happiness. And I belong to a crowd of students of well-being who've been messing up the study of happiness for a long time in precisely this way. The distinction between the happiness of the experiencing self and the satisfaction of the remembering self has been recognized in recent years. And there are now efforts to measure the two separately. The Gallup organization has a world poll with more than 500,000 people have been asked questions about what they think of their life and about their experiences, and there have been other efforts along those lines. So in recent years, we have begun to learn about the happiness of the two selves. And the main lesson I think that we have learned is that they're really different. You can know how satisfied somebody is with their life, and that really doesn't teach you much about how happily they're living their life, and vice versa. Just to give you a sense of the correlation is about 0.5. What that means is if you met somebody and you were told, oh, his father is 6 feet tall, how much would you know about his height? Well, you would know something about his height, but there's a lot of uncertainty. You have that much uncertainty. If I tell you that somebody ranked their life 8 on a scale of 10, you have a lot of uncertainty about how happy they are with their experiencing self. So the correlation is low. We know something about what controls satisfaction of the happiness self. We know that money is very important. Goals are very important. We know that happiness is mainly being satisfied with people that we like, spending time with people that we like. There are other pleasures, but this is dominant. So if you want to maximize the happiness of the two selves, you are going to end up doing very different things. The bottom line of what I've said here is that we really should not think of happiness as a substitute for well-being. It is a completely different notion. Now, very quickly, another reason we cannot think straight about happiness is that we do not attend to the same things when we think about life than we actually live. So if you ask the simple question of how happy people are in California, you are not going to get to the correct answer. When you ask that question, you think people must be happier in California, if say you live in Ohio. And what happens is when you think about living in California, you are thinking of the contrast between California and other places. And that contrast says in climate. Well, it turns out that climate is not very important to the experiencing self. And it's not even very important to the reflective self that decides how happy people are. But now, because the reflective self is in charge, some people may end up moving to California. And it's sort of interesting to trace what is going to happen to people who move to California in the hope of getting happier. Well, their experiencing self is not going to get happier. We know that. But one thing will happen, they will think they are happier, because when they think about it, they'll be reminded of how horrible the weather was in Ohio, and they will feel they made the right decision. It is very difficult to think straight about well-being, and I hope I have given you a sense of how difficult it is. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question for you. Thank you so much. Now, when we were on the phone a few weeks ago, you mentioned to me that there was quite an interesting result came out of that Gallup survey. Is that something that you can share, since you do have a few moments left now?
Sure. I think the most interesting result that we found in the Gallup survey is a number which we absolutely did not expect to find. We found that with respect to the happiness of the experiencing self. When we looked at how feelings vary with income. And it turns out that below an income of $60,000 a year for Americans, and that's a very large sample of Americans, like 600,000. So it's a large representative sample. Below an income of $600,000 a year.
60,000.
60,000. $60,000 a year, people are unhappy, and they get progressively unhappier the poorer they get. Above that, we get an absolutely flat line. I mean, I've rarely seen lines so flat. Clearly, what is happening is money does not buy you experiential happiness, but lack of money certainly buys you misery. And we can measure that misery very, very clearly. In terms of the other self, the remembering self, you get a different story. The more money you are, the more satisfied you are. That does not hold for emotions.
But Danny, the whole American endeavor is about, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. If people took seriously that finding, I mean, it seems to turn upside down everything we believe about, like, for example, taxation policy and so forth. Is there any chance that politicians, that the country generally would take a finding like that seriously and run public policy based on it?
I think that there is recognition of the role of happiness research in public policy. The recognition is going to be slow in the United States, no question about that. But in the UK, it is happening, and in other countries, it is happening. People are recognizing that they ought to be thinking of policy of happiness when they think of public policy. It's going to take a while, and it's not going to. And people are going to debate whether they want to study experience happiness or whether they want to study life evaluation. So we need to have that debate fairly soon. How to enhance happiness goes very different ways depending on how you think, and whether you think of the remembering self or you think of the experiencing self. This is going to influence policy, I think, in years to come. In the United States, efforts are being made to measure the experience happiness of the population. This is going to be, I think, within the next decade or two, part of national statistics.
Well, it seems to me that this issue will, or at least should be, the most interesting policy discussion to track over the next few years. Thank you so much for inventing behavioral economics. Thank you, Danny Conway.
Okay, so the next decade or two, we're living in that moment, in that time frame. If you go to some European countries, you're going to find that people are actually happy over there because of certain ways that their policy has been, I guess, implemented. Among the things, for example, like there is one country where they have really high taxation, but they have a lot of happiness instead, because the high taxation is actually funding a lot of the basic needs of people. So you have like healthcare and education and all those things are like funded by the government, and so you're pretty much taken care of completely, because you're paying them a little bit more money and stuff compared to America, but you are actually getting a lot more out of it and stuff. So everyone's happy because you're focusing on making sure the people are happy. It's sort of like the motto that I guess some companies use. You might say Amazon to an extent, and the idea is that you focus on the company, you focus on the customer's experience as the predominant policy of the company. In other words, the customer is the one that you want to make sure their experience is great. right? It's not about as much the company itself, although they might have a mission and so on, but it's about making sure that the customer is happy at the end of the day, right? And so they spend a lot of money in terms of, making sure that this is what happens and stuff. So just something to keep in mind over here. If your country is designed to optimize the experience of the people, then you're going to get happy people. But if your country is designed to not remember, to focus on a different self, let's say the remembering self, then in that case, it's, they're not going to feel happy about certain things and stuff, right? So the moment itself, when you ask them how they feel today, they might not feel good about themselves, and even the experiences that they're having and stuff may not be, they might not feel good about them, that then turn into bad memories themselves, right? So some things to keep in mind over here as you deal with people, in various capacities, including as government officials and policymakers, or program organizers in your local masjid or organization or whatever, or just working in relief organizations and like different capacities as educators, as whatever it might be, like a business owner or something like that. Also as head of households, or working among your families and stuff like that in different capacities. So all of these things, if you think about this, it can have a big impact, in optimizing our experiences overall as people with various needs and so on. Okay, so we have this other video right here. We have Maghrib just came in a few minutes ago, so we will go ahead and finish after this video, inshallah.
Каждый раз, когда Мелания спрашивает, мам,
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
Over the centuries, the effort to craft a perfect, bulletproof argument for the existence of God has taken many forms. There was the ontological argument of Anselm, there were the four cosmological arguments of Aquinas, and they still have their supporters. But many modern philosophers feel that they're simply too flawed, too inconsistent with our scientific understanding of the universe to be convincing today. But there was a fifth argument posited by Thomas Aquinas, and it was popularized several hundred years after his time, in the late 1700s, by the English Christian philosopher William Paley. And this argument for God's existence is still around today, too. In fact, it's one of the most popular. It's known as the teleological argument. You may know it as intelligent design. To make his case for the existence of God, William Paley gave us what's known as an argument by analogy. This form of inductive argument invites us to consider a particular state of affairs. Let's just call it situation A, about which we're already likely to have certain beliefs, and then likens it to situation B, with which we are less familiar. The idea...
So this is something that you might notice in fiqh. So for example, in the context of drugs, right? Maybe not in the context, because there's hadith that's more specific about this. Any intoxicant is haram, but in a context where something is not really the same. So like, for example, let's say cars, right? So horses and cars, right? Horses, or like whatever other means of transportation that might have been used in the past, versus cars today. So in this case, you can look at, for example, how they're used and things like that. So you might have the original ruling and the illah, the cause of something being haram or halal, whatever the the ruling might be and stuff. So the causation of it, and then the ruling therefore apply to it. So you have the original situation, and you have the reason why it's it has a certain end legislative ruling on it, and then this set of things, right, is then used as a reference for a new situation. So you have the new situation, and then you try to find whatever it is that the similarity might be. In this case, let's talk about whatever okay, let me give it whatever the illah, or whatever the causation might be, if it's present in the new situation as well, then it carries the same ruling. So the similarity in this case is the thing that's causing the ruling to take effect. And so if it's present in the second situation as well, the new situation that you've come across that is not explicitly mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah and so on, then in that case, you would apply the same ruling because of the shared cause for the ruling being present in the second scenario, right? So this is something similar that Muslim scholars do use when it comes to coming up with conclusions and so on.
is that in the interest of consistency, whatever conclusions we've drawn about A, we ought to draw about B as well. You can make an argument by analogy about anything, but Paley used it to talk about God in what's known as the watchmaker analogy. He asked us to imagine what we would think if we found a watch on the ground. Would we imagine that the watch simply appeared randomly, spontaneously on its own? Or would we see the complexity of it and notice that its parts seem to come together in a particular way in order to accomplish a goal? If so, wouldn't we think that the watch must have been made by someone on purpose? Paley was arguing that the teleology demonstrated by a watch would lead us to conclude that it was designed by an intelligent creator with a particular end in mind. Teleological means goal-oriented or purposeful, and we can easily pick out the teleologies of man-made objects. Got a bug here, as an example. It was created with a particular teleology in mind. It was designed to hold a liquid without leaking. It's got a handle put here deliberately in such a way that human fingers could easily fit into it, and its composition is such that it will keep the liquid inside warm without burning the hand that holds it. We wouldn't assume that a coffee cup would simply come to be exhibiting such perfect design for its particular function without someone having created it that way on purpose. So in the same way that the teleology of a cup implies the existence of a cup maker and that of a watch implies the existence of a watchmaker, Paley saw teleology in the world and assumed from that God's existence. He continued his analogy by comparing a watch to a living organism. Look at the complexity of the human body. Heart and lungs working together, producing sweat to keep ourselves from overheating, transforming food into energy. We're just generally amazing all around. Look at how elements of the natural world operate according to complex laws that sustain a beautiful natural harmony. Paley said that this couldn't possibly just have happened any more than the design of a pocket watch could just have happened. There must be a designer. If you accept this analogy, then you agree with Paley that just like the purposefulness of a watch compels us to believe in a watchmaker, the purposefulness of the world compels us to believe in a world maker, God. And you might think this is a fantastic argument. It might even be what motivates your own belief in God. There are lots of people who say things like sunsets and babies show them that there must be a designer God. But some of you probably aren't buying it, and you know what to do. Arguments are refuted by counter-arguments. So when you want to refute an argument by analogy, you offer a disanalogy. Basically, you demonstrate that situation A and situation B are dissimilar enough that the analogy doesn't actually work. So to object to Paley, we have to identify...
So the point over here is they're dissimilar enough, they're not similar enough, right? So they're dissimilar enough that they warrant a different conclusion at the end. For the second
way
case.
in which elements of the natural world, like human bodies, are relevantly dissimilar to watches. When we're talking about a watch, an objector might say, it obviously had a creator. After all, we can take it apart and see clearly how the gears fit together and move the hands and keep time. But there's so much in the natural world that isn't understandable in the same way. For instance, why would God have designed eyes to have a blind spot? Paley responded that it doesn't matter whether we can understand how something was created. The point is simply that it was. You might point out, for instance, that I actually don't understand the inner workings of my phone, but I still know it had a creator. Whether or not I understand how it was created is beside the point. Next objection is
So what happened here is when the original objection was presented, then he says, okay, well, that guy who proposed the original analogy example would then have a counter example. So you have a counter analogy or disanalogy, and the person is going to respond by giving another way to disprove that disanalogy.
Relevantly dissimilar to watches. When we're talking about a watch, an objector might say, it obviously had a creator. After all, we can take it apart and see clearly how the gears fit together and move the hands and keep time. But there's so much in the natural world that isn't understandable in the same way. For instance, why would God have designed our eyes to have a blind spot? Paley responded that it doesn't matter whether we can understand how something was created. The point is simply that it was. You might point out, for instance, that I actually don't understand the inner workings of my phone, but I still know it had a creator. Whether or not I understand how it was created is beside the point. Next objection, some parts of nature seem to be without purpose. A blind spot obviously doesn't have any function, and neither do nipples on a man. Paley's response here was, just because you don't know there's a purpose doesn't mean there isn't one. But this is a problem too, because his whole argument for believing in God is that you should look at the world and see purpose. So if we see some things are working great and really seem to have complexity and definite use, and others that don't, that's a flaw in his argument. What's more, the absence of any obvious purpose in things can lead people to start searching for purposes, effectively making them up. For instance, I could find a purpose for this finger. I could use it as a nose picker. It would make a good one. It's just the right size to really get in there and dig around, but was my finger designed to pick noses? Probably not. 20th century British philosopher Bertrand Russell made fun of this purpose-finding tendency by pointing out that you could look at a bunny and form the belief that that God gave it a fuzzy white tail so hunters would have something to shoot at. The point is, if we're the ones inventing purposes rather than recognizing ones that are inherently there, then we're the real creators of purpose in the world, not God. Basically.
Okay, so here's a good point here. So just because you assume that something is a purpose, or just because you assume a capital T truth, right? So that becomes your lowercase t truth, right? Just because you assumed it doesn't necessarily mean that it is the way it is, right? So in this case, we have to understand that when you're assuming something to be a purpose, do not try to project it as if that is the capital T truth purpose, right? Or the objective behind something or whatever. So keep that in mind, and then things become a little easier to navigate.
If you believe that God made eyes for seeing, then you also have to believe that he designed fingers as nose pickers and rabbit tails as bullseyes and blind spots as ways for us to get into car accidents. So the counter-argument here is we don't just get to pick and choose and say God designed the stuff we want him to have designed and not the other stuff. Rather than searching for disanalogies, another way Paley's argument has been countered is with an alternative explanation for condition B. Paley says that bodies are purposeful and from there concludes that the purpose been put there by an intelligent creator. But another explanation for how bodies came to have the complexity and functionality they have today is natural selection and random mutation. We can concede that the existence of a designer got the stuff.
Now notice this right here. So he mentions alternative possibilities. One of the possibilities is intelligent design. Another one is what he was saying. But then you'll see how they bring it together.
We want him to have designed and not the other stuff. Rather than searching for disanalogies, another way Paley's argument has been countered is with an alternative explanation for condition B. Paley says that bodies are purposeful and from there concludes that the purpose had to have been put there by an intelligent creator. But another
now, the alternative possibilities thing is what we've been doing in terms of our, things beforehand, like the why is the sky blue, why is the ocean blue, and so on. So that is something that, it helps in terms of understanding how to move forward in situations like this. If there is something that is compatible in terms of explanation, and it doesn't have, something to disprove it or to preclude it, then in that case, you might have to consider it, but then kind of see how you can move forward accordingly.
Another explanation for how bodies came to have the complexity and functionality they have today is natural selection and random mutation. We can
now. The question is, random selection, random mutation, is that something that is under the first category and that's just sort of a manifestation? Remember we talked about sub-possibilities? So within a possibility, you can have, what are some follow-up sub-possibilities that would fall under the first possibility or whatever possibility you're looking at, right? But it would still be under that one possibility. So is this second possibility really a sub-possibility, or is it an entirely different possibility? That's the question.
Concede that the existence of a designer God helped make sense of the origins of the world in a pre-scientific age, but now we have a perfectly good scientific explanation for how the complexity of the world came about. So who needs a watchmaker when you have evolution by natural selection? Another objection to Paley's case came from the 18th century Scottish philosopher David Hume, who pointed out that if we're to take the analogy seriously, we'd need to conclude that the creator that Paley posits seems to make a lot of mistakes. And not just blind spots, like how about hurricanes? Or why would he make bodies with certain tissues, like in the breast, prostate, or colon that are so incredibly prone to cancer? Why would he make umbilical cords that could wrap around a baby's neck? Why would he make butterflies have to wait for hours immobile for their wings to dry as soon as they come out of their chrysalis, making them easy prey for predators? Hume pointed out that the world is chock full of stuff that looks cruel, ridiculous, impractical, and contrary to life. A flawed world, he said, implies a flawed creator. Now, the development of evolutionary biology over the past couple hundred years has taken a pretty heavy toll on the teleological argument, but it still has many supporters, and their method for defending their view is a good model for the way the Socratic method is supposed to work. When opponents raise objections to your theory, you need to either reject it or modify it in a way that responds to those objections. So supporters of the teleological argument set out to modify and strengthen their view. Here are a couple modern responses. Contemporary British philosopher Richard Swinburne gives us a modern teleological argument with a twist of probability. He says that even if there's another possible explanation for the universe, we should go with the explanation that's most likely to be true. And he says that it's simply more probable that God designed the world world than that it came about through the pure chains of evolutionary processes. Likewise, another class of modern defenses of the teleological argument are collectively known as fine-tuning arguments. These arguments accept the Big Bang and evolution as scientific truths, but they maintain that for the evolution of life to occur, it's most likely that God set up the precise conditions that it required rather than coming about by accident. After all, if Earth were just a little closer to or farther from the sun, if the composition of the atmosphere was slightly different, if the content of our oceans was something other than what it is, life would have never taken root. A lot of people think these modernized arguments have more going for them than Paley's did. This is partly because these types of teleologists have moved from making assertions about certainty to making claims about probability, which seem easier to get right and to defend. Objectors will counter by saying that the problem with these arguments is you can't really make a probability claim when you only have a sample set of one. If we had multiple Earths that we could examine, we could see how likely any particular adaptation is or how unique the conditions for life are. Then we would know if it were likely or unlikely to happen without God. But we can't know that, at least not now, because we can only access this one world where we know that things evolved as they did. Thus, the counter-argument goes, Swinburne and other modern teleologists are right to recognize that if things were slightly different, then life maybe wouldn't have evolved or would have evolved very differently. But that different from claiming that it's unlikely to have happened in the first place. So, today, you learned about the teleological argument, objections to it, and the responses to those objections, and the responses to the responses to the objections. But we've spent an awful lot of time talking about God's existence, so next time, let's consider what God is like, if it exists. This episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace helps to create websites, blogs.
Alright, so one thing that I wanted to extract from this is that at the end of the day, there are a lot of projections of what God might be like or should be like or whatever, or how life came to be and so on. And a lot of these things sort of, what he was mentioning about evolutionary biology and so on, it's sort of like removing teleological arguments and stuff. However, it is worth noting over here that one of the arguments is that, or one of the things that I don't know if you mentioned in one of the videos after this, before this, whatever. But he was mentioning about how there is an argument that all of this stuff, even evolutionary biology, for example, might have actually been the process that was instated by God, by the designer, by whoever it is that, whatever. So that was an argument that was presented. In other words, that yes, this could have happened, but it does not remove the fact that this is a possibility that God set up the process to make it happen like that. So from an Islamic perspective, and I'm going to insert that in there, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the world and stuff. We know all that stuff, right? And when it comes to how the species came to be and how different things were and stuff, right? We don't know the specific details of whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created a system where some sort of evolution did take place, or did he actually individually create each separate animal? There are a lot of possibilities in this case, but there isn't a guaranteed, or there isn't a specific clear statement on this. On the other hand, when it comes to the creation of mankind, there is definitely a clear statement. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created Adam alayhi salam with his own hands and so on, in whatever suits his majesty best. And so that is something that we do have a confirmation of. So, for example, one of the possibilities is that everything else happened, evolutionarily, but then you had this specific thing of the human being itself that was manually created and stuff separately. That is one possibility, right? Is that the possibility? We don't know. Or it could have been that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed every single thing specifically, separately, and including mankind and stuff, But is that the possibility? So again, that possibility? We don't know, right? So the idea is that when it comes to people projecting and saying this is the guarantee, that this is a specific thing and stuff, right? And getting into too much detail where we don't have a confirmation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and so on, then in that case we get into uncertain territory. And if we make assumptions as if they're actually facts, then we end up restricting ourselves, limiting ourselves in a negative way and harming ourselves, because then we start projecting things a certain way, and when certain new information gets actually verified and stuff, for example in science and so on, then we take the hit and stuff, right? For example, there was this there's an ayah in the Quran, يا معشر الجن والإنس إن استطعتم أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض فانفذوا لا تنفذوا إلا بسلطان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to the Rahman that Ya ma'shar al-jinni wal ins, oh, you group of mankind and and the jinn kind and mankind, if you're able to get out of this like from the like the heavens and the earth and stuff, right? From the boundaries of the heavens and the earth and so on, then go ahead and do so, right? And you're not going to be able to do it except with like this power or authority that you would need and stuff, right? So some people thought that even though, like, if you look at the details and tafsir and so on, it's referring specifically to the day of judgment, because of the context. It's talking about the day of judgment when Allah is going to gather the people and stuff, and they're not going to be able to escape the the judgment that's going to be on the day of judgment, right? And some people, on the other hand, they said, well, you cannot get to Mars or moon or to the moon and stuff because you're not allowed to get out of these boundaries and stuff, right? So they would use this out of misunderstanding, and try to say that you're not able to go beyond the earth because of the fact that this ayah is going to prevent you from doing so, right? And so at the end of the day, they made a capital T truth assertion, meaning that is their claim about capital T truth, which was not actually capital T truth confirmed by the Quran and the Sunnah. And so this is very important when it comes to scientific facts and stuff that people try to extrapolate from the Quran and so on. It's not necessarily the case. And you might have like many famous speakers and others and stuff might actually try to make it seem like this is like very confirmed and like clear, but it may not be actually. And so some people might talk about like like a pulsating star, for example, or they might talk about certain other things about like about how the world works and stuff, and they might actually try to say that this is what's derived from the Quran and Sunnah, as if it was capital T true facts. Was it capital T true facts, right? We don't know, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't clarify certain things in a way that would make give us a guarantee. Or is it a possibility that whatever is being claimed could be? Yeah, there are cases where there are possibilities like that, and you can say, okay, well, that is a possibility, one possibility. Is it the possibility? Is it the reality? We don't know. We can't say that for sure. But when people do try to say it as a fact, and then science comes in and we find new information, according to the process that we've explored in the past few videos and stuff, right? Or in the past few sessions, if somebody comes in and they actually find out some piece of information that is capital T truth, and then it kind of debunks what somebody assumed to be capital T truth, and they thought this is coming from the Quran and the Sunnah, which when it didn't, then you can see the conflict that it can lead to when it comes to the belief of people and so on, especially when it comes to Islam and so on, and the doubts that might creep in because they depended so much on what was presented as capital T truth, whether it was relating to science or sociology or whatever, right? And it wasn't, right? So just understanding this helps us understand how to navigate different controversial issues potentially, but also in terms of how to navigate life. Now, do we agree on whether there is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a creator or not? As Muslims, we do. As philosophers who are going to be focusing on philosophy and its implications in life or whatever, they're actually not going to be able to prove anything. Like you saw in these previous videos and stuff, or in these videos up until now, that they haven't actually been able to confirm anything, right? They haven't been able to confirm how we acquire knowledge, how it works and stuff. They haven't been able to, convince themselves over the past many millennia. And I'm going to say this because this was in the Greeks, so like 4,000 years roughly. All this time, they haven't been able to confirm whether or not there is a creator, whether or not there is anything beyond this world, beyond the universe or whatever, right? Intelligent design or whatever. They have not been able to confirm or deny the existence of it. So functionally, they're stuck at trying to, figure out the truth of that. And if that's the case, everything else that would imply, or that would have any implication that would have in terms of moral systems or whatever, what's good, what's not good, what's better for people, what's not better for people, what's harmful and stuff, right? All of those things are yet to be discussed as well, because the most fundamental question about the origin of life and about everything that exists and stuff, right? If we don't have an answer to that, then everything else that might be connected to that, like for example moral systems and things like that, and ethics and all that, none of that can be actually addressed with conclusive certainty, because of the fact that we're still sort of stuck on answering the most fundamental question. And we cannot answer the purpose of life question, because again, we have not addressed the more fundamental origin issue. So with this in mind, functionally, it becomes so that you can't really do much, and you're just stuck in this sort of limbo of not knowing anything, not knowing for sure anything, right? And so you can also see how that can impact so many people. Like if you're going to impose secularism in your constitution, like France, in their constitution. I don't know if you've got a chance to read it, but in there's a specific clause that mentions that secularism is pretty much the basis of the country. But the question then is, okay, if we're going to assume that secularism is the best for the country, right? So what is the basis of that assumption? Is there anything to prove it? And if there's not, then in that case, anybody is, okay to, counter that. And like, for example, secularism is being heavily enforced in France right now, and that's where Muslims and others and stuff are taking a hit. Muslims and others, meaning other religious groups as well, right? And so the question is, if you're gonna like impose something on other people based on an assumption that you are making by your own volition, like you're the one deciding this, then in that case you should be open to other people criticizing that and saying, well, this is not right, you shouldn't be imposing secularism because it's not best for the people, right? If everything is done in the interest of the people, then you can question the foundation of the country and say, well, is it really the best for the people, right? Likewise, if you go back to the Constitution of the United States, somebody could say these founding fathers had limited data, they had biases and stereotypes and stuff about people that is being challenged today, right? For example, many of them were like Christian, of certain denominations and so on. They had a certain exposure to certain people, but not a lot of it. They had slaves being traded and so on and so on. So in this context, if they were designing a moral system for the country to follow, and I'm saying moral because legal and moral is sort of interconnected in this case, and the Supreme Court does make decisions based on moral issues, or like on moral issues and stuff like that, right? So if this is the situation that's happening, and we are pretty much deciding how like millions of people are living, now, in the past, now, and in the future, right? Based on the document that was put together by a certain number of people, right? That has certain assumptions and certain stereotypes and biases that are implemented in there, then isn't that something that we can also question, right? As in, is that the best thing to do or not? So the founding fathers seem to have thought a little bit about this at least, and so they allowed for certain ways to have constitutional amendments and stuff like that, right? But are they fundamentally challenging some of the fundamental assumptions that were held that might actually be harmful today, but are not being addressed as such, right? So these are some things to keep in mind when it comes to a lot of these things that you're gonna encounter, including ideologies and stuff that people have and stuff, right? So the question over here would be, what is the proof that this ideology that's being assumed to be a good one, right, is actually better, or first of all good, but also then better than any other ideology? Because at this moment, philosophically, scientifically, nothing has been able to be confirmed that something is better than another, right? So if this is the case, then everyone should be allowed to do whatever they want, including people who have biases against other people, right? Because then in that case, how do you question that by having biases is, how do you prove that the biases are not good? Because again, you can't really prove what's good or bad or whatever, except that people accept it a certain way. So then it becomes a very dynamic moral system where just because people don't want something to be good at one point and they accept something to be good at one point, then you just assume that, but then tomorrow the same group of people might hold the same, or different group of people might hold different things that they prefer. In that case, what happens? In that case, the people in the past end up like being bad people or good people, when in the future they were looked at it in a different way than they were originally. So how does that happen, right? If cops and like robbers, for example, if cops are looked at bad in a certain like time frame, and or cops are looked at good in a certain time frame, and then robbers are looked at in a bad way, and then in the future, if things change and people start, for example, and this is obviously a very extreme example and very unlikely thing, but I hope you get the point in terms of other scenarios as well, and other topics and so on. But if later on they decide as a whole society, hey, you know what, we're going to assume that cops are bad, and and some aspects of that are seen today with the Black Lives Movement and the the police states and stuff and so on. or the militarization of police and stuff like that. You know, that whole thing and stuff that's happening right now. So in certain aspects, this is not too far off, but in overall, I am using an extreme example. But in any case, if they decide that police are bad and the people are good, right? And I'm not comparing black people with robbers and stuff like that. This is just like I was just addressing this specific aspect of the police. Anyways, in this case, then you would have a complete reversal. So the roles would be switched, and so something like that is not actually good from an Islamic perspective. But if you're living in a world that has everything up in the air and anything goes, then you can see the impact of that, in a negative way. So I'm going to conclude with this, inshallah. But if you have any thoughts, I'd like to, hear them. And inshallah, if you want to share them today, that's okay. And if you want to share them, in a message, like WhatsApp or whatever and stuff, you can communicate with me directly. That's okay as well. And if you want to share it, wait and share them next time, inshallah, then that's as well okay. Whatever you want to do, just had some thoughts and stuff and some reflection. So I hope that you got some benefit from this TED Talk, but also this series that we've been, looking at with respect to these questions that we asked over here, and with respect to these check-in questions that we had earlier. So if you have any reflections, you could do them, inshallah, and if not, then we'll go ahead and close here, and we'll go from there, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك جزاكم الله خيرا